Okay. Great. Well, first and foremost, thanks for coming to listen to me, and we'll listen to the Cal and get involved this afternoon. We've been really looking forward to getting across here to Cyprus and break out from the sort of Sandhurst stronghold and the southeast of England, and try and be much more inclusive in the units that we get to have a chance to speak to. And obviously taking that overseas is absolutely fantastic for us, and the hope is that we can translate this in Northern Ireland at the back end of May, and we can do the same with Germany at the back end of the year as well, just to try and get out to as many units as we possibly can. I'll talk for about probably between about 30 and 40 minutes, and then we'll take questions towards the end. Quite happy to have a conversation. This really is quite a skim through what I'm going to cover because it's such a short period of time and it's such a vast topic. So, wrong way. So we'll have a look at a little bit of context, how we've kind of arrived where we've arrived as an organisation, a real skim intro into the doctrine, the code, and just pull out a few themes that are starting to emerge out of that and some of the feedback that we're getting. And then a bit about the Cal and how you can use that at whatever rank or position you are in the organisation, or for your own personal development. And then a couple of slides which kind of just a bit of a nod to where perhaps army leadership and leadership that we're involved in with other organisations is starting to move into. And then hopefully that will give you a bit of an anchor point to understand what the organisation's perspective is on this topic. So, what is it? Anybody courageous enough to offer a sentence, a single word, a thought? No wrong answers. I promise you there's no wrong answers.
Correct management.
Okay, so management's interesting. Is there a hand down here?
The art of motivating people to get to want to do a certain task.
Motivation, yeah. So we'll look at that word comes up in a different guise in the Army's definition. But it actually hints at a really serious problem. It's a really complex topic on the outside to get your head into. You know, if you search Google, you're in the billions of hits, 5.6-ish for words on leadership, over 130,000 books on Amazon to look at. And then if you decide what book takes your fancy on Amazon, where does that plug into what particular bit of theory you might want to look at? And there's stacks of that which has evolved. And no one academic or one person pins their flag to the mast against one particular type of thinking or theory. So they all kind of revolve in these different orbits, you know, but unfortunately there is no centrally agreed definition in the middle. And that makes it quite a difficult topic to have a conversation about, which feels quite awkward, I think, for the military, because we do leadership. We're good leaders, you know, we think of ourselves as an organisation that does leadership well. So to suddenly sit down and actually think how you talk about that's quite awkward. I certainly never really did it as a subaltern. I don't ever really recall having leadership study days. And there certainly was no starting point for that conversation. And it's quite difficult, I think, getting past not having a starting point to expose what you do and you don't know about a topic. And typically, if we're in positions of authority, based around rank or commands, we don't like to necessarily expose that we don't know a great deal about certain facets of something which we think we should do. So it can make you not have a conversation about leadership is the problem. We need to get past that. There is no right or wrong answer. There is your opinion, and I'll give you what the Army's position is, but it is a start point. And so in good old military fashion, anybody name individual on the right?
Slim.
Yeah, Slim, okay. Very famous for his command of 14th Army in the Second World War and Burma, but very much shaped by his exposure to Gallipoli in the First World War and his personal experiences and injuries, and his focus on the importance of values, in particular courage and character for him. And this is an oft, cut quote of his. That's nearly all you ever see from this particular quote. And it really focuses about this, it's just about you being yourself. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. That kind of makes it feel like it's an even more complicated topic to have a discussion about, because if everybody's different, how do you have a conversation about this that's in common with each other? And actually, it kind of leads you to think that maybe you're just either born to be a good leader, or you're made, or you can be made, you can be developed. And so, that's a very prevalent argument, born or made, and it's been raging for decades. The doctrine very much points towards the latter, okay? And this is the rest of the quote, which you don't often see. Don't again. Okay, development by thought, by training, by practice. It is no different to any other muscle. You know, if you go down the gym to work out to get stronger, fitter, more powerful, the brain is the same in terms of developing your leadership ability. It is absolutely within everybody's gift. It's just about applying and studying. Yes, take a bit of the theory, because the theory is useful to provide you with context and a bit of foundation. But then it's about experience, about having the courage to try something different, maybe expand and do things slightly differently with the way that you work with people. So this absolutely runs as a theme through the doctrine. This is about inclusivity, and this is about leadership for all. So why bother investing in it? Well, that's 2017 Defence Service Inquiry, so where there's been a death or serious injury, the largest factor identified across all the service inquiries is related to leadership and leadership behaviours, particularly in training. And we can have a separate conversation about why we think there's some issues with leadership and training. So there's certainly a need for it in a looking after your people sense. AFCAS last year, so you might not see the detail, but less than 50% for all answers about attitudes towards senior leaders in understanding their interests, championing their own service interests, communicating decisions, and managing them through change. So there is a dissatisfaction with certain elements of leadership in the British Army, borne out by survey. And then ultimately, it feeds into the argument about we've got to be able to retain people, not just recruit them, which actually is going pretty well now, has turned a corner, and the numbers are going through the roof again. But the retention piece is still a battle to fight and still invest in. And so there are absolutely some really fundamental reasons why we do need to think about how we think about people, how we treat people, how we get people to behave around each other. Who does that apply to? Who are army leaders? Any thoughts? All is the answer. All of them. And if 15, 17 years of service in Afghanistan have taught us anything, it's about the operation that we prepare to fight will not necessarily be the one that we fight. And this, those 17 years weren't peer on peer, with equal tech, fighting in large formations as we trained. Previous to that, they were small bodies of men spread geographically around locations, undertaking daily routine activities in the control of junior NCOs, senior NCOs, and junior officers. And who are the people we invest least in leadership training? Junior NCOs and senior NCOs. Officers get far, far more across their career, and we'll look at the numbers, than the soldiers do. But we spent the last 17 years putting leadership on a daily basis in the management of life into the hands of those most junior people. So it's got to be about everybody and all ranks. It can't be about position and rank. And so there is responsibility for everybody, is the message, to get involved and look at how you develop yourself. Don't worry about the detail. The point is you will recognise that's an officer pipeline, that's a soldier's pipeline as you go through CLM, where you go through career professional development. Why does it matter to you? Because that is about 28 to 32 days across a whole career, 22 to 24 years now. That is 2 to 3 years, across an officer's career, if you go all the way through to the end. That is not a great deal of mandated time in your career where you're spent studying command leadership management activity. And you don't even study it for the whole period of those courses either. So if that is a punctuated intervention, you're only going to get a certain amount that the Army gives you, and it's going to be fairly focused, and it's going to be a one-size-fits-all. You go on a course, you get the course delivered. It won't necessarily reflect what you need individually, or you're interested in individually, and how you develop your style. And so the piece that we always try and talk, and one of the jobs that we have at the CAL, is to work out how we fill the gaps in between. And so the point about, do you see the blocks, and ignore the biases of the diagram, but do you see the blocks where somebody's giving you something you can receive? Do you see the spaces in between? Hopefully you see them both. And it's about how you fill the space in between so that you start to develop both for yourself and for your organisation that daily incremental change in behaviours. And that is just daily incremental habit-forming activities, which mean that you think about or you invest in your leadership. And we've had some pretty horrendous failings, let's be blunt. Nothing new, 1952 for Scots Guards, with the massacre in Batancalai, Northern Ireland. This is about 3 months ago in Sandhurst. It's pretty prevalent, and the problem is, reputationally, it completely unpicks everything that's come before it. And so it completely undermines the trust relationship that exists between the military and civilian society and democracy. And so the fact that we are given permission to go abroad and represent the British people is based on a notion that we will behave in a certain manner. And that's why values and standards are so important to the Army, because there has to be an acceptance of trust. And the minute any of this stuff happens, that just gets cut away and you've got to start all over again and building that relationship. And so, that type of activity has really led us to think a bit more about this. You would undoubtedly all say, if I said to you, do you consider yourself in a profession? Are you a professional as a soldier? Absolutely. That would be my answer. I absolutely consider myself a professional. Would your answer be the same if I said, do you consider yourself a professional leader? And you might not even think about it in that way. You might say no, but actually that's what we need to be aiming for. We do, in this wider definition, have special knowledge and skills. We do have particular principles, values and standards. We do have a code, the Army Leadership Code. And so we meet all the tick box criteria, but that's clearly not enough. It's about the translation of that into behaviours and about thinking about investing so that we are professionalising ourselves as leaders. Because undoubtedly, if we decide to leave and we put it on our CV, we've been in the Army, we will certainly play on the fact that we have done and experienced leadership far more than a lot of organisations. And so there's a beholden element to professionalise that notion. And so a number of those things in the background and the failings in particular led us in 2015 to a review, British Army Leadership Review. Took about 6 months, quite wide-ranging, and it came to about 8 recommendations. But the first and foremost one was about putting leadership back into the heart of the profession. And there were 2 subsets to that. The first was writing a doctrine, because we had never actually codified at that point a single source of information on what the Army's position was. With lots of snapshots, guides, pamphlets, reflections, but nothing which really pulled a single trail. And then the second one was creating the Centre for Army Leadership as a leadership focal point, effectively, to have a deliberate mission to start to drive and encourage and support leadership activity across the wider Army. And that effectively has to be linked to something tangible, because nobody invests money and time and effort unless there is something tangible. But the point is, the investment is about delivering better operational outputs, better performance in barracks, better behaviours, people treating each other better, being treated the way you'd expect to when you come in. So it is about professionalisation, but it is about a tangible output at the other side. We'll talk a bit about the end and maybe in questions about how you measure how tangible that is. And so when you're writing a doctrine, you clearly need to balance quite a few things. Okay, and I say doctrine is a handbook. It's a guidebook, it's a philosophy. Don't think about it as doctrine in a strict sense. But you don't want to throw away the stuff we know works, the stuff that we've learned from experience, the stuff that still makes, any one of you have the courage to dig your face out of the mud under fire and do the right thing in a difficult situation. That still relies on character. That still relies on a good ethical base of values and standards and certain qualities and about character. And so we want to keep that. We want to keep the things we do well. Fighting spirit, will to win, ethos, heritage, identity, all those things that have made us a great organisation, historically proven. But at the same time, you've got to be flexible enough to recognise all the things that are changing. The way in which we access information, the growing urbanisation, the proliferation of non-state actors, increasing operation with civilian forces, remote targeting, remotely piloted weapon systems, all the ways in which that's changing, which present a whole series of challenges that are different for the coming generation of leaders, both in the way they try and deal with the sheer mass of data, how do they analyse that and make decisions in a timely fashion, how do they potentially lead robots, how do they make ethical decisions about a platform which is operating thousands of miles away. So some really difficult challenges. So the doctrine has to be robust enough to try and not make things too prescriptive, but just give you a handrail to deal with that. And I think very much front and foremost is, the way I experience that, or an LE officer experiences that, is very different to a 17 or 18-year-old coming in who have had a completely different perception of how they both want to be treated, about the way in which they access information and tech, the very easy manner in which they can have an opinion or get involved in a conversation through a tweet, through a WhatsApp message, through a Facebook post, through a video on YouTube. There is an expectation of being listened to, of wanting to be heard, of wanting to be part of something. You only have to look in the news this week, the Swedish 15-year-old who, through an online campaign, has led 60,000 school children to strike because of global issues. there is an inherent power that was never there before. That doesn't sit comfortably with a hierarchical organisation, which the military is. That is a flat structure behaviour. But that is a reality of what we have to be able to learn to deal with. And we have to find a balance between how do we get the most out of a hierarchical structure, but how do we incorporate what people need and want from a different generation. And that's really challenging. And clearly, where does this go? Who knows? And so the doctrine was published for those, just a quick, I'm not expecting a room full of hands, but who has heard of the Army Leadership Doctrine? Be honest, I'm not fussed either way. Okay, so it's quite a small amount. Who's opened it, read it, or used it? Okay, that's actually about the same. But it's quite low still. I mean, it's very nascent. It's December 2016. If you've not been in that course environment, you wouldn't necessarily have come across it. So this is part of the purpose of these talks. It follows on from the Army Leadership Code, which just focused on the code, and we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. But it's just about bringing together a collection of what has worked historically for us and focusing on that. It is really easy to read. It's really thin. You don't have to read it chronologically. You can dip in as you want. It's quite practically orientated. It doesn't read like doctrine I've ever seen. It really is almost like reading a book. It's owned by us, but the important piece is it's just a start point. It's not the right or wrong answer. There's no arrogance there to say you must believe this, but it can be quite powerful to at least sit down and have a conversation, like I said, because you know what your organisation says it believes in. And you can have a conversation about the people you lead or the people you work with about whether that's relevant in your particular situation and the job you do, or whether actually there's more to it than that. And so that's the leadership definition in the doctrine. It's difficult to come to a single definition, particularly in a sentence. Does it fairly well, I think. Talks about who you are, what you do, how you do it, and actually the point you made about motivation. Motivation being linked to inspiration and the need to do that in an inspiring manner. And we'll talk a bit about what that really means. And so we have a bit of a hang-up in the military about associating and conflating leadership, management, command. We heard at the start, the mention of management. Other organisations we've been fortunate enough to work with in the civilian space don't even really necessarily acknowledge leadership, certainly don't acknowledge the notion of command, really focus on management and really conflate the notion of management. They are very, very different things. Now, for us, command is a really useful tool to simplify an organisational problem that is big, a big organisation, i.e. I can focus my intent through one person who's in command position. Command is aligned with a legal tie with responsibility and accountability. Okay, and it absolutely carries leadership in a positional sense, but it can be seen or can be useful in mostly a transactional situation. It doesn't necessarily provide you with that inspirational aspect of how you deliver that leadership. And so the point I speak to about leadership for all ranks, is also linked to this notion of personal power. And you as an individual either having authority as a leader through your rank, through your experience, through your specialisation, from you just being the right person at the right time in the wrong place. And so all those things are as equally powerful about how you can step up to the plate, and take on that leadership responsibility. So trying to de-link those ideas of command, leadership, and management. Management very much a science of using resource and process. Absolutely essential, probably arguably a good debate, leadership versus management in barracks, about which might be more useful to getting your outputs done. And management very key to underpinning trust in relationships. I will do things I say I'll do, like your MS. Writing MS isn't necessarily a good leadership tool, but it's a good management process to go through to demonstrate that I do invest in you and think about you. So really distinct things to think about is the key. That's the leadership framework. So that's effectively what the doctrine looks like when you open it. So you can dip in and out. It focuses on character, what leaders are, what leaders know, and how they do it. And I say this is the position of the army, but it's not the only point of conversation. So we'll dip into those briefly. So as I said, this is really about that ethical base, values and standards as we might see it as a mat, but actually as a relationship with society, about underpinning that trust, but also underpinning trust between us as individuals, both in the command relationship or in a team environment, and as we work together as a team, that I can trust you and you can trust me that we will behave in a certain manner because we are aligned to achieving the same values. And the army is a values-based organisation, i.e. it aligns the achievement of its goals based on behaviours aligned with key values. And therefore, the leader clearly has to think about being the example, the role model. There are numerous studies, I'm sure you covered them in various courses, right through from Stanford prison experiments, the Milgram experiments, some more modern day stuff like Derren Brown that talk about authority and group dynamics and the way in which really large groups of people can be driven by the behaviours of one or two key individuals. So there is an absolute responsibility there to take on being that example and role modelling to build the right identity. Has anybody seen, quite a few of us have come across the Dunning-Kruger effect, anybody seen that before? About cognitive bias, basically, so linking to what leaders are, this notion that often there is a correlation between those who have the most confidence but the least amount of ability, and an inability in those who don't have a lot of knowledge or wisdom on a topic, actually, not recognising that, not being aware, not being self-aware of actually how good or how bad they are. And I think we've all found ourselves kind of at that top point of, Mount Stupid. I certainly have, in terms of thinking that I knew a great deal about leadership at various points. And then the more I've got into this job, particularly in sub-unit command, I've really realised there's a lot of stuff I absolutely don't have any clue about. And so I think the critical point is, where do I go from there? Do I either just turn my eye away from that and pretend that I've got to protect my position because I'm scared to fail? I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing or having a conversation. And so I can turn away and stay on Mount Stupid, or I can see that as a bit of an eye-opener. I'm now in a kind of valley of despair because I know the things I need to improve on. I understand my weaknesses better, and I embrace the learning that I need to do to actually get there. And then you can start to hit that kind of slope of enlightenment. It's a light bulb moment. So that transition to thinking as a learning person. And that actually ties in clearly with being aware of who you are. And it's a bit, emotional intelligence is a really big buzzword, nothing new. Still a bit of a contested contest, but just that notion about how self-aware are you about your emotional state, what impact does it have on other people, how do you manage those emotions so you get the best out of them and mitigate the worst, how do you empathise with the people around you, how do you understand their perspective, do you understand their perspective, and then how do you communicate, negotiate, and resolve conflicts with those people. And so whilst you might agree or not agree with some of those things in terms of the academic underpinnings and whether they're valid, the notion of just thinking about who you are and how you behave with other people is an entirely valid concept, because I don't want to come into work and have my boss effing blind at me and treat me like a piece of shit and expect me to do things that are clearly unreasonable. And I'm sure nobody else in here does either. So they're valid concepts. And clearly feedback is a way of doing that. We don't do this very well. As an organisation, we do this pretty poorly, actually, we're light years behind the curve from some organisations. But there are some mechanisms that are free out there. There is a J-Hub tool, so they come under the JFC. So you've gone Defence Intranet, type in J-Hub, literally J-H-U-B, and it will bring you up a free 180, 360 assessment tool where you can invite other people to comment on you as an individual that you work with. And they can be frank, but they will give you an indication about where you're doing things well, where you're not doing things well, and that's going to help clearly adjust your behaviour or how you interact with people. And so there is very much a focus here on building that character and understanding who you really are and who you are and how you behave, The doctrine doesn't talk about this. It was deliberately omitted. We can have a conversation about afterwards. But it's certainly a question that comes up a lot about why it's not in there. And this is really obviously a focus about, can you be a leader all the time? Is this really about being a follower? And you can't have leaders if you haven't got followers, so how can everybody be a leader? And there are various academics or authors that focus on this. Stephen Covey focuses on this a lot, that you can judge the quality of the leadership of the organisation by the quality of the followers. And so you can either sit in this camp where you just kind of blindly follow your leader over the edge and you do what you're told and you don't think about the rationality or the logic of that, and you just literally have blind obedience. And so you'll see 1906, that isn't a new concept. That's been around for a long time. But there's acknowledgement that absolutely every single person, regardless of their competence and how good they actually are, will have blind spots. And the more senior up the organisation you become, the bigger your blind spots become. And so you then get into this conversation about courageous followership. And so as much as there is a responsibility on the leader to look after you and invest in you as people, there is as much of a responsibility for you to look after your leader. And that might be in a positional sense, a rank sense, whatever, but about telling them where things aren't working out right, having a way to reasonably challenge them, isn't disrespectful, but gets to the nub of some of the issues, encouraging conversations with those people to unpick some of the things that might not be working for you as a platoon or a section or whatever. And so having the courage to do that. And Ira Chalif, an American academic, he came and spoke for us last year in October, in fact the year before, sorry. His video is on YouTube. It's a great watch, and he talks about some really intelligent ways you can disobey, but you can do it in a respectful manner, and he gives a framework that you can build into your procedures that allow you to have a conversation about that. And he uses the example of the guide dog, taught to obey all its life, but knows absolutely when to disobey its owner in order to save that owner's life, and when it's the right time to do it. And so that kind of leads us as a follower into some of the work by Caroline Dweck. I'm sure some of you will have come across this, or certainly heard the terms fixed mindset and growth mindset. And really this notion that we either accept that we can become involved in this and we can be courageous, but as a follower, that might mean we have to put our head above the parapet and say a few things that aren't necessarily popular, which might mean that we might look like we're not doing our job properly, or we don't know how to do our job properly because we're exposing ourselves slightly and we are making a mistake. Or do you take that growth mindset, which she speaks to about, that you have an appetite to learn, and you can only learn by actually being courageous enough to make some of those mistakes and take some risks and take some chances. So there's a whole bundle of stuff in there, but it's a really interesting topic, and I think probably up for discussion as to whether it goes in the next iteration of the doctrine. Chapter 2, effectively, what leaders know, really speaks to competence and this notion of everything else that you can do or you are as a person. There still has to be this underpinning of ability, and some of that is absolutely about technical competence, so being a good infantier, the same as being a good signaller, whatever it is, absolutely sits front and centre. But there is a wider responsibility if you know that you are going to become a leader, or you're being a leader, about looking at all the other things you might need to think about how do I problem solve, how do I manage information, how do I make decisions, what are the different ways in which I can do that. That takes a bit of investment to think about that. How do I communicate with people? Some of the pieces we picked up before. How do I listen? What are my non-verbal cues, my body language, all the things that influence how people perceive us or they interact with us, and whether we get any engagement and whether we start to get into that inspirational space. The Army leadership model, it's been around a long time. 1950s, John Adair, normally referred to as action-centered leadership. The Army has kept it because it's a simplistic model for just thinking about how you do your leadership, and because it's focused on delivering actual actions or outcomes. So it's not just about thinking or theorising, it's about actually having a framework to do something off. And it really just speaks to this notion of, as a leader, the three things in big handfuls that you can very simplistically, at a tactical or an operational level, think about, which are: how do I balance the needs of the task, the team, and the individual? So how do I work out what it is I'm being told to do? How do I plan and think about the team that I'm going to do that with, and what they bring to the party? How do I communicate that with people? How do I then execute that plan through the team? And then how do I support individuals and evaluate the whole process in the notion of context? And always about context, clearly about what situation you're in. And if it's going well, then that balance should sit and look like it does there, but actually, realistically, it's not going to look like that most of the time. It's going to focus sometimes on the task because it's a mission-critical task, time-dependent, safety issues, and the needs of the team and the individual go to the back. But actually, if you use those functions, you can work out how you need to balance that task. And then at other times, it will swing back, much more about looking after individuals and families. And so it's a really easy framework to apply at a lot of different levels and at scale for an organisation of 80,000. So a few of the things that have kind of come up in discussion as we've sort of talked about the doctrine and what leaders do, and empowerment is the buzzwords. Everybody likes to talk about this, particularly about how to engage people and retain people and make a happy workplace. It's a really interesting conversation that underpins that about your relationship to power, and really about whether you think of it in a really transactional sense, i.e. if I keep hold of power, I win and you lose, or vice versa, you lose and I win. Or actually, are you much more open to thinking about this as a fluid relationship? So it's not a commodity that you either win or lose, because you then start to treat people as a commodity, because I've either got it and you haven't, or I'm not really that willing to give it to you. Or actually, it doesn't really matter, power shared is power gained, because I bring all of your brains into the conversation, and we've got lots of collective brain power to solve this, because I'm willing to look at the issue differently. We very much refer to it as mission commands, centralised intent from one person, normally in command, decentralised execution. Okay, I would argue, we can have a conversation afterwards, I think we do that pretty well on operations because the way in which we can control that are there, the mechanisms aren't there rather than on operations. So you're normally dispersed, you're operating over, communicating over radio, you just don't have the physical mechanisms to put controls on people, so you have to trust them more than you ordinarily would. I would say we don't do this particularly well in barracks, and again, happy to be challenged on that. Speaking to the majors in ICSC a couple of weeks ago, fundamentally thought this was a broken concept in barracks, that they were constrained, they had no delegations, they weren't trusted, and effectively, we spoke a good game about this, but we didn't really do it. David Marquet, who came and spoke at our conference, US Navy submarine commander, that's his book there, really short book, really interesting read, took the approach of, if I act like a leader, people will become followers. Therefore, I have to act differently as a leader and empower those people to become leaders themselves by stepping away from that conversation, creating space for them to think about how to do things themselves, inviting them to come in and give their collective brain power to the conversation about making them a true learning organisation because they're willing to make mistakes and fail in order to achieve excellence and not risk doing things because they would be seen to be failing. And so he talks about it in terms of you can't give over control until you have created competence and you've given clarity. And so you've got to make people able to step into that space and you've got to let them know exactly what they need to do so they have the freedom to really do that conceptually from a brain power perspective. Task Force 714, you can download that off the internet, it's free, short PDF, it's got an executive summary at the start. It's a really good example of how the military can do empowerment in a broader sense, this idea of giving people imagination about what they could become in the organisation, not just a templated format like mission commands. And TF 714, Special Forces Group, charged with taking down Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and they went from 30 missions a month to 300 missions a month when McChrystal came in and embraced this concept. So they completely flipped the triangle on its head so that the operators were making all the decisions based on just a really pure intent at McChrystal's end. And that meant giving up all sorts of control and being exceptionally uncomfortable with what might fall out of that and some of the risks that might fall out of the way the operators behaved at the sharp end of the stick. So some really interesting lessons in there. And trust, absolutely fundamental. If you're into Simon Sinek, absolutely another sort of leadership guru, really leans on the notion of trust, giving clear direction, building cohesion in teams, recognising inclusion, creating diversity, bringing everybody's brain into the fight, doing what you said you were going to do, communicating that you're going to do it for their good, not for your good, having the ability to deliver on what you're saying you're going to do. So really fundamental focus on trust as really being the glue in that whole relationship. And then something where I don't think we do particularly well formally, coaching and mentoring. If you're in the phase 1, 2, 3 pipeline and you're an instructor, there's a good investment in making you a coach and developing you as a coach and giving you qualifications and accreditations. It's an interesting conversation how much we do that if you're not in that pipeline. So as a platoon commander, platoon sergeant, how much actual training and education have you had on how to be a better coach and adopt a coaching style of leadership? Not a great deal, I'd suggest. And mentoring, we don't really do with any formality. How do we take people to be better through the whole life of their career by giving them experience and wisdom? And we kind of do that routinely as subordinate developments, so how we look after our people. But that is inside a relationship where it potentially prevents me from exposing myself and failing because I have a reporting relationship with you. Proper mentoring is being able to step out of that space and look at doing it with someone that I'm not connected with, that's confidential, where I can really talk about things I'm worried about, where I'm not performing, where I am, in need of a bit of help. And we've seen other regiments that are starting to do this quite well, that are starting to link up, and this is a great location to think about it. How do I link up a platoon sergeant with somebody in the RAF that has the same problems to think about, but is thinking about it in a different way because he's come through the RAF? How do I think about doing it with a civilian sector, or just somebody to bounce some different ideas and perspectives off? And so clearly, this is a fairly well-worn model, but we certainly see leaders that embrace that inspirational notion called transformational leadership, which is a certain set of behaviours where they exhibit styles on the right-hand side. Now, the doctrine recognises that you have to have this transactional stuff, i.e. do as I say, do it now, or follow my example. But if you typically exhibit these behaviours on the left, and you'll get good short-term results, but they will typically be short-term because they will not focus on the individual. And so the stuff that we try and promote through the doctrine pushes on the right-hand side, which allows you to exhibit a range of styles, but builds motivation, inspiration through the behaviours that you seek, and drives that empowering sort of behaviour as well. And typically, good leaders are seen as those that can adopt about four of those styles on a fairly regular basis to deal with the situation they're in. And so the back end of the Army Leadership Codes, I don't know how many of you have seen that, but effectively the code are the behavioural ways in which we translate the values and standards that we say we ascribe to as an organisation. Great. How do you actually realise that in something tangible that you can see on a daily basis? And it's these behaviours here. Now, sceptically, you could absolutely say, well, that just says leaders. You've just come up with those because that fits the word leaders and it fits into the doctrine really easy. There is a little bit of that, I won't lie. Bit of wordsmithing, but it's based on sound evidence. And it sits underneath the whole series of underpinning theory from about sort of 30, 40 years ago, which looked at the behaviours of the most successful organisations, and they were about challenging people, giving them demanding objectives, supporting them in meeting them, developing them, being an inspirational motivator, and really focusing on looking at a people-centric approach to this. And so the Army took that effectively in the early 90s with these two gentlemen, Hardy and Arthur, were based at Bangor University, and they worked with CTC Royal Marines down in Lympstone and with the Naval Surgical School, and they were asked to run a series of trials as to whether all of that previous evidence applied to the military. So were those behaviours productive to the military to adopt? And they ran a series of trials, had a series of troops go through training that went through training as normal, without any assistance with their instructors, no interference, and then they took a series of troops that had the instructors were given additional coaching, and the instructors were additionally coached to exhibit these behaviours with their troops on a daily basis, as much as they possibly could, and they looked at practical ways they could do that. And they found at the end of the exercise that the troops that had instructors that were exhibiting these behaviours had about 10 to 15% operational performance improvement, both individually and collectively as an organisation. So they definitely delivered a better output. They then repeated that in 2006 up in Catterick at ITC, and ran exactly the same experiments in a controlled environment where everybody's got the same food, sleep, training, same stresses, and exactly the same results, about 10 to 15% improvement from those that were subjected to these behaviours. So the point is the doctrine is underpinned with some evidence, research-based findings which work if you apply them. And so the thought process is, okay, so how do you deliberately think about how you put those behaviours or encourage those behaviours in your unit? And we can have a talk about how some do that. So the CAL, so as I said, we were established January 2017, effectively to conduct these activities here, spread the word about the doctrine, get people using it, applying it, promote, support leadership development, things like this, workshops, activities, conferences, etc. Bringing some coherence to Army training, so supporting CLM packages and the CLM 19 package and the officer career pipeline. So what formal training you're getting, is it correct? Is it delivered in the right manner at the right time to develop you for your next one or two positions? And then doing that informally in terms of filling in the gaps, like I mentioned. And then really talking about the leadership networks and how we engage with people and spreading those networks out so we can start to bring in some wider learning into the organisation. And then what we're kind of doing at the moment, developing, is the academic piece. So Professor Lloyd Clark, who looks at what our wider sector's doing, what is the academic thinking about this, how do we take the way leadership is developing more widely and actually use that to solve Army challenges. What are those Army challenges? And so we recently ran the very first annual survey. We did it in a fairly formal, deliberate sense, and we inserted that into mandated CPD packages. So we've got responses, about 1,000 responses from 2,000 people surveyed, from private soldier right up to one-star general, which asks them about the code, the doctrine, their behaviours, what behaviours they see in their unit, about what challenges they are specifically facing for their rank, for their unit, for their cap badge on a daily basis. So what is troubling a junior NCO versus what troubles a junior officer? What are the challenges? What do I need help on? What is the biggest challenge I see the Army has with regards to leadership? What are the challenges we think we might face in the future? So really looking to use that to underpin a research programme and then start to produce some research which solves Army challenges and starts to evolve our doctrine as we move forward. So how can you access some of the products? So I think primarily, again, this is not to say that any of this stuff is right, but it's a resource you can use. You are clearly exceptionally busy delivering operational outputs. ECIs, looking after paperwork, doing MS, sport, AT, all the other things that take over a training program that don't really facilitate you getting into this as easily. So the products we produce are there really just to give you a series of access points to think about this without having to do lots of the hard work behind. And so we have some written products, which are really just about getting people to think and write. So there's an opportunity to write, and these are across the ranks. We've had people writing these. We've had a junior NCO, senior NCO. I've got a warrant officer writing one at the moment. They're a bit more considered, but we will support you academically with that. Give us an idea, give us a draft, and we will then help develop that academically, and you will then be a published person across the world, globally, on the internet, on our sites. But it was your thoughts about what interests you and what troubles you from your perspective, again, about getting a variety of perspectives. We put those on both sides of the firewall, on the AKX, but also on our website, so you can access them in lots of different ways. The quarterly digests, they come out in poster format. You can put those up in your unit lines on leadership boards. They signpost you towards other reading, activities that are going on, events you can plug into, and then they're available in soft copy to go into the links. There's lots of links in there to podcasts and the like. And then we've started to create, got the second one being developed at the moment. The first one is on our AKX site at the moment. That is a good to go half to full day leadership package. So that could be your monthly CPD in a nutshell done. You just download it, the presentation's there, it unpicks what leaders do as a chapter of the doctrine, but lots of workshops. There's a central presentation you follow. It's got all the handouts, it's got the instructor notes, it's got an action plan in there that you take away individually, and it just gets you thinking about things with a few scenarios thrown in. So they're about creating time to get you into discussing the topic effectively. We have our conference annually. The next one is 23rd of October. It's completely free to attend for all MOD personnel, civil servants, and then we sell tickets into the civilian market. We expanded that drastically. We just had the second one in November. The first turn of the wheel was quite small, 80 people. Second turn of the wheel were between 700 and 800 people attended, and then we live streamed to about another 1,200. So that's grown quite exponentially. We had some great speakers this year that would normally cost literally tens of thousands to come and watch. It's all free. We live stream that as well, so that's live streamed across Defence Connect all through our YouTube channel. So again, if you can't make it for obvious reasons of being geographically separated, you can sit in here, plug it in for the day, and people can come and go and watch what they're interested in. Obviously unit visits, as we're doing now, but also to share good practice. We're really desperate to start coalescing some amazing stuff that we're seeing that's being done by the units, so we're not learning the same stuff over and over again. If you've got stuff, if you're coming across it, if somebody you know is creating some good practice or some good products, then send it in to us and we'll share it. And then monthly CPD, again, a leadership speaker series. We try and run that monthly, and we're bringing external speakers, civilians, sports individuals, commercial people, who give us their perspectives on a particular topic of leadership. They're free to attend, but if you can't attend them, we live stream those again, so you can plug in via our Facebook page and live stream it over a laptop and onto the screen, or we watch it online. You can watch it on Defence Connect as well. And again, completely free. And you can, we use an interactive tool called Slido, which you probably use here. So you can sit here and actually ask questions from here to us live at Sandhurst while the event's going on as well. And at the end, we then have a Q&A, and you, again, we'll answer questions. And people are plugged into that from Australia, with an Australian infantry mess plug-in. Falkland Islands, Batak in Kenya have plugged into those events. So it's quite easy to do. And the Cal Activist Network. So we work on a bit of a cascade system. So how do we do this quicker? How do we get people having a conversation quicker? Well, we call them Cal Activists. They are volunteers serving members of the forces from private soldier to lieutenant colonel. It's a rank agnostic organisation. It's effectively people that are enthusiastic or already involved in leadership or are taken by the subject, enjoy doing that stuff. And they are effectively there to, as a bit of a conduit, a link man or link woman into the Cal, so they can use our products and we can use them. We ask them to help spread the word, maybe set their own network up, maybe run their own leadership, or be the person that sets up their own leadership committee for their unit, runs a book club, runs workshops, whatever. And we then try and invest in them by giving them various access to certain private events and certain things that we get given tickets to. And, I think most of them get a good deal out of it. I mean, this from Sergeant Minton is quite a long quote, but it certainly emboldened him to use that Cal activist tag to be able to do stuff and lean into a bigger organisation to do some of the things he was interested in doing. If you're interested in doing that, drop us a line and state that, and then we will have a conversation with the chain of command and then hopefully bring you on board. Or it's people that we come across and we invite them to take part and get involved. We've got about 180 so far, so it's growing, not as fast as we'd like. I'd like to get to a point, ideally, where this isn't seen in some sort of threatening way. This is about having a conduit to do some of this stuff. It'd be great to have a junior NCO, a senior NCO, and a junior officer, sat in every unit across the British Army that can really then plug into this. And we can start understanding where they are. We can connect them better. So in geographical terms, they are linked to each other and they can support each other and help each other out. And it all then becomes a lot easier to just run leadership stuff or think about it or talk about it. So hopefully it becomes self-serving. And it's going on, and I'm sure there's some great stuff clearly going on in this battalion as well. We come across it because we get to just see lots of different units, and it's really, really motivating to us to see some fantastic product, whether it's the Yorkshires who pick an individual out, talk about what they've done, but they talk about it in terms of the doctrine. So if you want to reinforce the leadership behaviours of the code, you have to communicate them and show where they're being role modelled effectively and reward that progress, obviously, to build that behaviour. But 3 Scots, who ran a great leadership committee, run by junior NCOs to junior officers, and they came up with a 12-month programme for the battalion, which everybody then bought into because it took the opinions of all, or whether it's running a MOS site, creating your own MOS site, or cards that you carry talking about it, or debate nights, or whatever. We will try and support you, or we'll put you in contact with people that might have done it before, just to help you out. Nearly there. So CLM 19 rolls out the back end, middle part, about June, July, is that major? Yeah, so September. So Sergeant Major's been fully plugged into developing that. There is now much more leadership content in the CLM package, now going to be called?
Army Leadership Development Package.
So Army Leadership Development Package is what it's going to be called. Much more stuff on mental resilience, much more stuff on ethical decision making, much more stuff on role modelling, coaching and mentoring for junior NCOs and senior NCOs. And try and readdress some of the misbalance that there has absolutely been in focusing on officers for leadership development and not focusing on soldiers enough. And there's a real push, particularly under the old Army Sergeant Major, to making sure there was greater parity between investing in soldiers and investing in officers. Leadership playing cards, you'll get given, Sergeant Major's got a pack to give to your RSM. I wouldn't call them ethical playing cards, but they are effectively just another product where, you can sit down and they are basically just junior NCO pack, senior NCO pack, and an officer's pack. And the scenarios are just orientated around situations that you might find yourself in, which provide you with an ethical dilemma. They're nothing more than the starting point to have a conversation. And doing it in a fairly, again, that's your monthly CPD. It's a workshop. You sit around, platoon commander or section commander can sit around with his 8, 12, 15 blokes and girls and just have a conversation, turn the card over. Right, that's talking about misconduct and dishonesty in the stores. Or that's talking about, inappropriate behaviour in the mess. Or, and actually just having a conversation sets the boundaries of expectation between the people in that room, so you understand what the consequences or what the accepted behaviours are for your unit in those situations. They're nothing more than that, okay? And you can do that as confidential or otherwise as you like. And they're being trialled at the moment, and we'll hopefully roll them out to every unit at the back end of this month. And then ideally, at the back end of May, we're going to hopefully start pushing out a fairly regular podcast, orientated around a command series, so getting some sort of senior soldiers and senior officers to share their experiences, who's inspired them, what lessons they've learned and they can share. But then also getting some experiential podcasts, people that have performed and produced on operations and have really learned from some pretty traumatic situations. Again, they can share their experiences in combat. So that's the new products that are coming out soon. I think this is where we're going. I think leadership ultimately is going to get away eventually from being this mandated mindset where you go on a course and it's a one-size-fits-all. Apprenticeships are heavily supported by the Army at the moment, but there is a newer relationship with Reading and Henley Business School to give academic qualification for graduate and postgraduate to soldiers and officers. Again, this is too strongly weighted for officers at the moment because they go through Sandhurst to get this. But these are the first 30. It went through Portsmouth University with the old ASM, Army Sergeant Major, Mr. Horton. There is another cohort going through the next 30, and there's certainly discussion now about opening up graduate opportunities for soldiers in leadership and strategy, and just starting to bring more parity to that relationship. Ultimately, one of the tools that's been developed is this mobile-friendly app where you can start to capture your leadership experience on a digital platform, where that then gives you time to, while you're capturing it, you're reflecting on it. So you're starting to think about the experience you've had and why that was good or bad. But actually, it's then captured on there and potentially can be used to accredit qualifications when you go on some of these courses, or you step into that mandated pipeline. So I think we'll get to a point where it isn't a one-size-fits-all. What you need developing is able to be developed. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but it will take time. We are good at putting people in other organisations at the moment. If you're in that sergeant to lieutenant colonel space, there is a separate scheme called external placements that you can apply for. It's on the jobs lists, and it puts you in for a 6 to 12-month placement in a whole range of organisations, and these are some of the ones that are plugged into, and these are some of the people that are plugged in. And it gives you an opportunity to broaden your perspective, to increase your portfolio, put extra stuff on your CV, but also to learn and bring stuff back. That's pretty nascent. It's not really. It's only it's fairly new. So we need to get better, as in we, the CAL, need to get better at pulling the lessons out of that and sharing what's working and things that we could do with a bit of help on. But again, it's moving in the right direction. I think the only thing I'd bring out on this slide really is we get asked a lot of questions about this. Why bother? How do you prove the value? I think the main message I bring out is don't think about it too much. You don't need to prove the value in a metric sense. There is innate goodness in developing and investing in people and being a learning organisation and thinking about it in the experiences that you capture, about the difference it makes to people, and not getting so caught up on this or this cause and effect or a money pound sign. But again, we can have a conversation about that. And so where do you go from here? I wouldn't be so arrogant to make any suggestions, because you'll all take different things out of a presentation about what's applicable to you. And maybe something resonates, and maybe something doesn't. But really just I think going away from having done something, sat in here, to thinking about maybe some of the points that did resonate with you, and then what does that mean for you planning, both individually, but maybe for the team around you, and then how you're potentially going to realise that, and giving you some ideas about how you can realise some of that. But, get involved with us, get interested, become an activist, follow us, retweet that stuff, and just use the products effectively. I won't read through that verbatim, but I think hopefully we've covered, most of that. This is about, it's just a start point about having a conversation and about just starting to think about this in a professional sense. It is an all-ranks event. It is about continuity, i.e. doing things regularly versus intensity, and not just punctuated episodes. And we like to open up everything to everybody and just get involved is the key message I think I'd say take away. And that's me.